911, what's the location
Now,
of your
a special report from Care 11 Investigates.
Tell me anything that you can about the party that's shooting.
I am.
A mass shooting exposes fatal flaws,
I had to tell my kids that mommy's not coming home.
lack of accountability,
Now we got the finger point game.
gaps upon gaps.
He's dangerous.
Those needing help
And he was unraveling.
not getting it.
He had shot up a bus and killed someone.
Minnesota's legal and mental health systems broken.
Cost of that is human lives.
Care 11 Investigates the gap, failure to treat, failure to protect. Thanks for joining us. I'm AJ Lagoe. This year-long investigation by our team shined a light on systemic failures to treat and care for people with mental illness and protect the public. It resulted in transformative statewide reforms. Our investigative team began searching for answers when Buffalo, Minnesota became the scene of a mass shooting and bombing. What we found? Fatal gaps in the state's mental health and legal systems that stretch far beyond Buffalo. Housekeeping underway at the Overbay home. A lonesome task for a man who lost his partner in life.
I had to tell my kids that mommy's not coming home.
Donnie's wife, Lindsay, was murdered when a man got on a public transit bus for a short ride. In his pocket,
fully loaded 9mm semi-automatic handgun.
and in that briefcase he's carrying,
4 improvised explosive devices.
the man got off the bus, walked into the Buffalo Allina Medical Clinic, and started shooting. 5 minutes later,
911, what's the location of your emergency?
Crossroads Clinic.
the gunman himself called 911.
Tell me anything that you can about the party that's shooting.
I am. A bomb or two is going to go off.
By the time I got to the hospital, I found out that she had passed away on the OR table.
4 other people were injured. The community mourned, questions mounted, many persist.
Trying to figure out, well, why? I don't understand why.
Why and how?
I got 4 or 5 with gunshots. I sent the first ambulance.
How was a man able to get a gun when he has a documented history of mental illness and threats like this?
Grab your fucking pistol and go down there and kill as many nurses as you can.
It doesn't make sense.
To get some of the answers we were seeking, we needed to speak with the killer himself.
Yes, AJ, this is Gregory Woolrich.
We're not looking to give the Buffalo Clinic shooter a platform or fame. We're not broadcasting his rationalizations or finger-pointing, but some of what he has to say shines a light on the gap that cost an innocent young mom her life. How did you get that gun?
I went to Fleet Farm and just bought it.
Nothing came up, nothing flagged when you tried to buy it?
Of course not. I had no history.
No history? In the immediate aftermath of the clinic attack, police indicated much the same thing.
Within that history, nothing to indicate that we would have been in the situation that we are at today.
However, as we discover, that's not exactly true. There was a history, as Ulrich's former roommate, Raymond Zanstra, told us.
He had all kinds of mental health issues. He was a druggie.
2 years before this,
At least 15 shots were fired.
Looking at least 5 injured critically.
court and police records show a dangerous history. Years of simmering anger over his push for opioids following a 2016 back surgery.
He would have a month's painkiller gone in a week and a half because he'd get high on it and then he'd want more.
Pain gets bad.
Records show physicians cut off his prescription because he was hospitalized for a potential overdose.
I was so mad, and I stayed mad.
October 13th, 2018. Police were contacted by a doctor at the Buffalo Clinic who said Ulrich was calling with threats about shooting, blowing things up, and practicing different scenarios of how to get revenge. That he was angry with the medical community, a threat to himself and society, and that he wanted it big and sensational so that it makes an impact.
There was a particular doctor that he did not like.
Ulrich was issued a harassment restraining order, but less than 3 weeks later, he was charged with violating it. The court ordered a mental health exam. A psychologist diagnosed him as mentally ill, citing his grandiosity, paranoia, and rigidity. He was found mentally incompetent to stand trial. Under Minnesota court rules, that meant his misdemeanor charges just had to be dropped without even an attempt to treat him and restore him to competency.
Gap is the perfect word for it.
Judge Catherine Messerick helped lead a 2019 work group that studied the gap for people found incompetent to go to trial, but who don't meet the standard for mandated treatment through civil commitment at a place like St. Peter's State Hospital. For years, there's been no consensus on how to close the gap.
What's the cost of that?
The cost of that is human lives.
When those charges were dropped, were you provided any mental health care?
No.
Just turned loose, with a hope and a prayer he wouldn't reoffend.
It's a judge's worst nightmare.
How often does this happen? Court data reveals from 2016 through 2020, more than 1,600 misdemeanor cases like Ulrich's were dismissed because the defendant was found incompetent. It's also happening in more serious crimes. Carol Levin found more than 2,100 gross misdemeanor and felony cases where the defendant was found incompetent, but judges had little to no authority to require them to get treatment. Take a case from Dayton's Bluff. On Valentine's Day 2022, a 14-year-old girl was raped by a stranger who broke into her home. Criminal charges say Miguel Huerta admitted to breaking in and raping someone, but claimed not to know it was a little girl because the lights were off. Previously, in Carver County, Huerta was charged in 2019 with theft in a case where a woman also said she had been held captive. Huerta was found mentally incompetent, so charges were dismissed. In Ramsey County, he was charged with burglary, accused of breaking into a woman's house with whom he considered having sex but didn't do it, again ruled incompetent, again released. Now, a child has been raped.
Sounds like you're saying you don't really have a rule or the authority to do what you think needs to be done.
That's correct. That's correct. To put it mildly, we don't have a toolbox to do that. We don't have the tools or the toolbox.
You on the Crossroads Alina Clinic?
Yeah.
Back to Ulrich and that burning question about the gun.
If you're mentally incompetent to stand trial, how are you competent to own a weapon?
Donnie was not the only one asking.
And how did this fall through the cracks?
GOP legislator Marion O'Neill represents Buffalo at the Capitol and says her granddaughter was scheduled to be at the clinic later the very same day Ulrich launched his attack.
I thought, how in the world was he allowed to possess and actually purchase a new weapon? I didn't understand it.
Here's what our investigation discovered. A psychologist diagnosed Ulrich as mentally ill and determined he was incompetent to stand trial. Minnesota law says a person is not allowed to possess firearms if they have ever been found incompetent to stand trial by reason of mental illness. That word found is important. Only a judge can make a court finding. For Ulrich, that never happened. The prosecutor dismissed the case first, so nothing showed up on a background check preventing him from legally buying that handgun.
What does that tell you?
Well, that tells me there's a gap. This is a gap in the law that allowed Ulrich to purchase a gun and murder somebody in my district and maim 4 other people.
Gaps upon gaps that cost Lindsay Overbay's life.
There's a hole, there's a void that just isn't going to be filled.
Coming up, could a deadly shooting on a downtown bus have been prevented?
He was saying that I need help.
The Gap continues after the break. February 6th, 2020, 9:30 at night. No provocation, no warning, just gunshots to the heads of 2 passengers on this Metro Transit bus. One man badly wounded, the other killed.
This could have been prevented.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
In most news stories,
Could have been prevented.
this is where you'd meet the victim's family.
So,
You are, but probably not the victim you expect. Geraldine Neighbors is the mom, Brittany Leslie,
He was saying that I need help.
the sister of Malcolm Leslie, the 26-year-old man on the bus accused of pulling the trigger. His family says the state failed to give him the mental health treatment a judge ordered.
and he was unraveling.
You could see that.
Yeah.
Scary.
Mm-hmm.
Malcolm's family says signs of mental illness began to manifest as a child and in early adulthood worsened.
Could you tell that this was a man battling mental illness?
Yes.
Cab driver Kelly Sorempa picked Malcolm up December 30th, 2018 and drove him to Brooklyn Park. Confused on where he wanted to go, he tried to pay with marijuana.
I told him I'd call the police if he didn't pay me. And that's when I heard the click.
The click of a gun to her head. It didn't go off. Malcolm hopped out and ran, later arrested, charged with assault with a dangerous weapon. A court-ordered mental health exam diagnosed him with substantial psychiatric disorder, which grossly impairs his judgment, behavior, capacity to recognize reality, and ability to reason or understand. A judge ruled Malcolm incompetent to go to trial. He agreed to be civilly committed for treatment, and the judge ordered him committed to the Commissioner of Human Services, DHS, which runs the St. Peter's Security Hospital and Anoka Regional Treatment Center.
The county attorney called me up and said that he is very mentally ill and that he's probably never going to get out. And then I had saw online that he had shot up a bus and killed someone.
That someone? Tommy McCoy, taking the bus to meet a housing advocate as he attempted to move his daughter and grandkids from Chicago to live with him here in the Twin Cities.
Anybody could have been sitting on that bus.
Traherne Pollard.
Anybody.
Is McCoy's cousin. He says his family asked for answers, asked for accountability.
When it comes to accountability, now we got the finger pointing game. Oh, it's your fault, oh, it's your fault, oh, it's their fault.
Our investigation finds what happened leading up to the death of Tommy McCoy were catastrophic failures on all levels of Hennepin County and Minnesota's criminal justice and mental health systems.
And it's such a tragedy.
Lisa Daly is executive director for the Treatment Advocacy Center, which focuses on the intersection of mental illness and the criminal justice system. She reviewed Malcolm's records for KARE 11.
It just seems like something really fell through the cracks there.
September 3rd, 2019. After the incident with a gun in the cab, Hennepin County Judge Phil Carruthers ruled Malcolm a substantial likelihood of causing physical harm, that he's incapable of voluntarily following a treatment plan, so required inpatient psychiatric treatment. This is when Malcolm agreed and the judge ordered him civilly committed to the commissioner of DHS. The order states, transportation will be provided by the sheriff of Hennepin County. Malcolm was to be held safe and secure, and the head of the treatment facility shall not permit his release, discharge, or provisional discharge until further order of the court.
This didn't happen?
No. No medications, no doctor's visits, no nothing.
Malcolm's family says all they know is he walked out of court and went home to live with his mom. He continued to deteriorate, hearing voices, becoming more and more delusional, self-medicating with drugs.
They sent him back to you?
Send him back home.
Yeah.
Are you a doctor?
No.
Did you know what to do with what you were seeing going on with your son?
No.
As months passed, court records show treatment reports were filed noting Malcolm's whereabouts were unknown. So, was anyone looking for him? There's no record anyone from DHS or Hennepin County actually tried to find him. He wasn't hiding.
He was home with me.
Backing that up, just 1 week before the bus shooting, records show Geraldine escorted her son to a court-ordered follow-up evaluation.
He just, slipped through the cracks.
Until 5 months after he was ordered committed, supposed to be held safe and secure, he got on that bus and for no discernible reason, pulled a gun.
The fact that this young man was able to walk out of that courtroom is a catastrophic failure to society. And unfortunately, my cousin was a recipient of that failure that could have happened to anyone.
Still ahead, mentally ill, known to be sexually dangerous, a man described as a ticking time bomb, court-ordered into homelessness and lost.
You can tell the way he's touched me, it's not good.
That's coming up on The Gap.
And I'm constantly looking over my shoulder.
Laura Carlson knew the house next door in her quiet Fridley neighborhood,
the blue one,
had recently become a group home, but had no clue who would move in and what would happen.
I mean, geez, that dude was like a sexual predator right next door.
You won't find Omar Issa on Minnesota's sex offender registry. He doesn't have to register his address with police. He's never been convicted of a sex crime. On the public court website, his record shows just one old gross misdemeanor. Nothing that hints at the truth.
He's dangerous.
In 2017, Amina Botan was approached outside the Carmel Mall in Minneapolis by Omar Issa.
And he asked me a favor. Sister, I'm sick. Can you help me?
Amina agreed to give him a ride. It was a mistake. Once in the car, she says a ride home was not what this man wanted.
You can tell the way he's touched me, it's not good.
She pulled over at this intersection and ordered him out.
He said, I have the gun and his anger.
Amina says she jumped out, but he grabbed her. A struggle ensued here in the street as she screamed for help and he yelled that she was his wife.
He's trying to pull you back into the car and he's telling people that you're his wife.
Yeah, and I say, no, I'm not his wife. Help.
He was trying to take you.
Yeah, front of people.
With witnesses calling police, Issa let her go but stole her car. He was arrested 3 days later for aggravated robbery. Amina thought he'd go to prison. Instead, police and court records show he's repeatedly walked free, leaving a trail of sexually assaulted women.
It's clear that he's a ticking time bomb.
Mark Gray is a civil mental health attorney appointed since 2009 to represent Omar Issa. He says Issa, who is severely mentally ill, repeatedly falls through gaps in Minnesota's legal and mental health systems.
Yeah, I don't think there's any doubt that he's a safety risk to both himself and others.
Found incompetent to stand trial for the carjacking, a judge ordered him civilly committed to the care of the Minnesota Department of Human Services to ensure his safety and that of others. It was Issa's fifth commitment. DHS held him at the Anoka Treatment Center less than 6 months before provisionally discharging him back into the community.
I call it a revolving door.
Repeatedly in trouble, Issa bounced in and out of jail, courts, and the mental health system until August of 2020. He's charged with raping a woman on this picnic table while witnesses screamed at him to stop. Again, incompetent to stand trial. Again, civilly committed. Again, provisionally discharged by DHS. He was sent to the Fridley Group Home next door to Laura Carlson.
And she ran from this house over here up my front step.
On September 9th, a terrified woman ran to Laura's door. Court records show Issa had suddenly attacked a female worker in the group home, grabbed her neck, struck her in the face and chest in a violent sexual assault before she escaped.
She was crying and screaming.
The very next day, at the Anoka courthouse, the inexplicable happened. Even though it was allegedly Issa's third attack, even though he was still under his, by now, 8th civil commitment order, a judge let Issa walk free. He was also issued a no-contact order, prohibiting him from going to the group home where he was technically under civil commitment.
What does that do to Mr. Issa?
Well, it renders him basically homeless. He's got nowhere to go except shelters and staying on a bridge or whatever.
That's exactly what happened. Issa disappeared onto the streets, missing numerous court dates that a judge inexplicably expected the homeless, mentally ill man to, because of the pandemic, attend via Zoom.
Is this a man who's capable of showing up for a Zoom court hearing?
That's not possible. He's not going to do that. He doesn't keep a calendar.
Left to his own devices, is he a risk to reoffend?
Absolutely.
He stayed lost until Carol Levin found him wandering the streets, hanging out at the same mall where he approached Amina 4 years ago.
He scared me, really scared me.
Less than 2 hours after our report aired, exposing the courts and mental health system's inept handling of Issa's care, police rushed out and picked him up. He's now, once again, under commitment in Anoka.
There are many people like him in my experience, but they're slipping through the cracks.
Still ahead, our investigation discovers a state agency made a policy decision, widening the cracks and resulting in murders, rapes, and violent assaults.
I don't think people understand. Well, we certainly didn't.
That's coming up on The Gap. Welcome back to The Gap. As we continue to pull the thread on this investigation, we discovered a gap in the system caused by a unilateral policy change at a state agency that's directly fueled violent crimes in Minnesota communities.
East Bank Station.
Terrion Sherman's life is seemingly one wrong track after another. A hell on wheels existence filled with violence and run-ins with police.
So y'all take people to jail for getting into fights?
At the end of the line, a young woman who loved him, beaten, repeatedly stabbed.
I mean, Abigail was like brutally murdered.
Next to Abigail's body, Sherman's 2-year-old nephew, covered in blood but alive. According to police records, Sherman said the boy became possessed like a dog, told him Abigail was really a man and a dog, so he punched her hard as hell, but didn't remember stabbing her.
You can't even imagine this nightmare. You just can't imagine it.
Michelle and Tom Simpson
Hard for me to talk about.
are talking about their daughter Abigail's murder because they believe the responsibility lies not just with the man accused of killing her, but also at the door of this state agency.
And I don't think people understand. Well, we certainly didn't.
To understand, you need Terrion Sherman's history. In 2016, he provoked an argument with a stranger on the train, followed him off to rob him,
Take his phone! Take his phone!
and with a friend, kicked and stomped his head into the tracks. In a plea bargain, he was convicted of just theft. The next year, 2017, he met 19-year-old Abigail Simpson from Wisconsin, who moved to St. Paul to get treatment at Hazleton for substance use issues.
She met him when she was in early recovery.
After treatment, Abigail returned to Wisconsin, while Sherman's troubles worsened. August 2018.
Breaking into cars, and he's been starting brush fires.
He was the subject of an all-out manhunt in Maplewood.
Been running around through the woods and neighborhoods terrorizing people with a garden hoe.
Also accused in 2 other assaults, including punching female employees while stealing from this store. But he wasn't convicted. A court ruled he was incompetent to stand trial, mentally ill, chemically dependent, and in need of treatment, because he posed a substantial likelihood of physical harm to self or others. The court ordered Sherman civilly committed to the custody of the Commissioner of the State Department of Human Services, DHS, which runs the St. Peter's Security Hospital. Just 2 months after he was committed, DHS issued this bulletin announcing a major policy change. Citing a shortage of mental health beds, DHS unilaterally decided to provisionally discharge, that means release, patients it felt no longer needed inpatient care, even people with histories of violence who had not yet been restored to competency. They explained it in this PowerPoint. To treat more people, they had to discharge more people. Terrion was discharged to Joyful Home Healthcare, a Fridley group home.
We were responding to the increased demand for our beds.
Dr. Kylie Stevens is DHS's chief medical officer. She says restoring a person to competency to face criminal charges is not their job. Treating mental illness is. So when they believe someone no longer needs a hospital bed level of care, they're now provisionally discharged.
We are a treatment provider. We're not an arm of the law tasked with ensuring that public safety, in that realm is continued.
That move by DHS created a situation in Minnesota where almost overnight it became no one's job to attempt to restore a mentally ill criminal defendant to competency.
It's very easy with large systems in government to think you've solved one problem and to create a whole new set of problems. And I think that's what happened here.
Judge Catherine Messerick explains that DHS decision created a new gap in the system when someone like Terrion, still mentally incompetent to go to trial, is provisionally discharged. Judges' hands are tied. Even if a judge knows the incompetent defendant is dangerous, they have no recourse. Legally, they can't put them back in jail indefinitely.
They don't have the authority to do anything else but let them go.
DHS claims these discharges are safe, though they have no data to back that up.
if a person is not able to go back to jail and they're not able to be maintained safely in the community, then we don't provisionally discharge them. It's as simple as that.
Do you track how many patients who have been provisionally discharged since this change go on to commit more crimes?
We have no way of tracking that information.
DHS doesn't track it. Neither does anyone else. State Senator Jim Abler began holding hearings in response to Carol Levin's investigation.
Since nobody tracks these individuals who are running around the community, because it's nobody's responsibility, no one knows what happens.
So, what happens? Carol Levin tried to do what no one else in the state is: track these cases. What we found flies in the face of DHS's claim that they only release people who are safe to be in the community. In addition to Terrion Sherman, Carol Levin identified dozens of provisional discharge gap cases, including violent assaults, rapes, and other murders.
There are cases after cases after cases of people who have been in this gap, in limbo, in the Swiss cheese system, where they've gone off and murdered somebody.
Other examples we found include a police officer dragged down the street by a speeding pickup while being punched, according to criminal charges, by Damone Ivory, a severely mentally ill man who had been provisionally discharged just 2 weeks prior. In another case, a woman raped on this Minneapolis picnic table. Then there's Alandis Augustin, who attacked a girlfriend, leaving her bloody and battered, and court records show stabbed 2 other men, all while on provisional discharge.
But oftentimes, there isn't real monitoring for these individuals who are provisionally discharged, and that's what puts the public in danger.
Brandon Vaughn is an attorney representing Abigail's family, who didn't know until after her death Terrion was on provisional discharge from the state security hospital. At the group home, he was free to come and go. Records show during 8 months, he missed his daily antipsychotic medication 76 times and was even arrested, spotted selling narcotics on a Metro Transit train. Despite clear warning signs Terrion was not getting the treatment needed for a safe and stable life, Ramsey County, now responsible for his care, never tried to revoke his provisional discharge. Meanwhile, Abigail returned to the Twin Cities for school and work, and the two were dating.
She was in a relationship with him. She cared about him.
They were babysitting Terrion's nephew together the night he's now accused of killing her, while delusional, hallucinating she'd become a man. Her family begged Minnesota leaders to hear their story and close the gap.
Do it as if their child's life depended on it.
Coming up, a story of one tragedy and 2 victims, the man who died and the man who killed him while on provisional discharge.
It's life and death. The gap is about everybody dancing around. Nobody wanted to take responsibility for it.
The gap continues after the break. For the past year, Carol Levin Investigates has laid bare systemic and too often fatal failures to treat people with mental illness and protect the public. Here's a story of one tragedy and 2 victims, the man who died and the man who killed him. A nostalgic wander down memory lane.
This is Christmas Eve at our house.
Reminiscence for Joseph St. James of when life's journey was far less lonesome.
Paul was the love of my life.
Paul Pfeiffer, musician, uncle, Joseph's husband.
And he deserved to have a long life, and he didn't, because we don't take care of our mentally ill.
Paul was killed. His life ended by a man who fell through Minnesota's broken mental health and criminal justice system into the gap.
911, that is the emergency. No! No!
June 12, 2021, Scott Circle in Brooklyn Park. Paul Pfeiffer had walked to get the mail.
And I heard the screeching of tires, and I heard him be hit.
Man, what happened?
A screaming Joseph called 911.
What? Listen, Black SUV 950.
Kids in a nearby park recording a TikTok video captured footage of the black SUV driving away while Joseph held his husband of 16 years.
He was dying right in front of me, and I wanted his spirit to see me loving him when he was going.
Police quickly zeroed in on a neighbor with whom they were all too familiar. Christopher Rice is severely mentally ill, documented to have violent tendencies. The year before, in January 2020, he was civilly committed for the second time. Despite records showing he violently attacked his doctor at Fairview Riverside Hospital, he was released. Then, his case manager lost contact with him due to the pandemic.
911, what is the address of your emergency?
6 months later,
The neighbor just came over and started beating up my husband.
And I got out of the truck.
John Wupples, Rice's neighbor, was the target of an unprovoked attack.
And as soon as I looked up, he slapped me in the side of the face. And then he tried to punch me. Glasses fell off. I ran around the truck down the road to escape him.
Minutes later, another neighbor, 18-year-old Ariel Wright, was carjacked.
But I got pushed and I got scraped up pretty bad.
Arrested and charged, Rice was found incompetent to go to trial. Again, ordered committed by a judge. But while still incompetent to go to trial, he was released under a provisional discharge, right back next door to his victims on Scott Circle. There was little oversight, and records show he often refused to take his medications.
There's a gap in the system. There's no way that he should have been just out in the community. There's no way.
June 11th, 2021.
It was terrifying for me when I saw the knives.
John Wupples' wife, Kari, sees Rice walking around outside with knives.
And I quickly just ran back in here, slammed the garage door down, ran in the house, locked the door behind me, and called 911.
That day, Rice's social worker filed a notice of intent to revoke his provisional discharge due to concerns for his safety and the safety of the community. It did not happen fast enough. The very next day,
This is going to be a person hit by a vehicle.
Paul Pfeiffer was run down. The irony? Paul himself lived with mental illness. So Joseph wants to make this point clear.
The vast majority of people that are mentally ill are not dangerous. That's an absolute fact. Vast majority. But some of them are. One of them killed my husband.
Rice told police voices in his head told him the person by the mailbox had done something bad to his mother and to hit the victim with his car, which he did. Rice was charged with murder. He's again been found incompetent to go to trial.
This is a much bigger problem than just my husband being killed. And that's a huge problem all on its own.
Exactly how big a problem are gap cases? We found no shortage of examples, from carjackings to murders. But as our investigation already discovered, there's no data. No one is really tracking it.
I know we're probably, in Ramsey County, we're looking at a couple of hundred of these gap cases easily.
We sat down with Ramsey County Chief Public Defender Jim Fleming before his recent retirement.
Are these gap cases any secret to anyone?
No. No, everybody knows about them, and who are working in the system. We all know about them. The prosecutors know, the defense attorneys know, the judges know.
Everyone in the system knows about these gaps. It begs the question, why haven't they been sealed? Everyone we spoke with gave us the same answer.
We know what needs to be done. It's going to take resources to do it. And because this is mental health, this is not cheap. It's expensive, and we know it.
It's a cost our investigation found is being measured in lives. Lives like Paul Pfeiffer's and lives like Christopher Rice's, who even Joseph acknowledges is a victim in this too.
And if you're going to say it's too expensive, give me a number. We can't spend more than this. Own it. Go on TV, say the number out loud, and say that certain people's intrinsic value is only worth up to this number.
Still ahead, citing a public safety crisis that can no longer be ignored, state lawmakers take action.
This is going to save lives. Not a life, but lives.
The Gap continues after the break. For the last year, our investigation has exposed how gaps in Minnesota's criminal justice and mental health systems were fueling heartbreak and loss in communities across the state. Citing a public safety crisis and moral obligation to provide better care for those with mental illness, lawmakers set out to seal the gaps. You're watching as a Minneapolis cabbie is about to drive through Minnesota's violent intersection of criminal justice and mental health.
I ain't getting no nothing. I ain't getting nothing. I ain't getting nothing.
Let me out, this
Get out.
Let me out. Stop the car.
Get out.
Let me out. Stop the car. Stop the car before I stab you. Let me out. 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 Let me out.
Let's back up. That man with a knife? 19-year-old Darkeezy Shorter. He deals with mental illness, has been charged with numerous crimes, many violent, but fell through gaps, repeatedly found incompetent to stand trial, and repeatedly released without adequate supervision or treatment.
It's not good for someone to recycle, frankly, through the jail and the emergency room and never get their needs taken care of.
Sue Abderholden is the executive director of NAMI, Minnesota. For years, she's led efforts to identify solutions and urge lawmakers to address what Carol Levin's investigation spotlighted: the long-standing systemic flaws, loopholes, and outright failures in the state's criminal justice and mental health safety nets.
We don't do our society any good by not making sure that people with mental illnesses get treatment. We just don't.
On that, Carol Levin's investigation sparked growing consensus in this place where consensus is hard to find.
Why do I have a Republican and a Democrat sitting here agreeing we've got to do something?
Because it has to get done. There is no other solution. And for Representative Edelson and I to agree on this matter speaks to the urgency with which we have to move it forward.
GOP State Representative Tony Albright and DFL State Rep Heather Edelson co-sponsored legislation designed to start sealing the gaps. The biggest one being when a person with mental illness like Darkeezy Shorter is found incompetent to go to trial. It's no one's job to help restore them to competency, so they're often just cut loose. The new law creates a statewide competency restoration system, provides funding for 120 forensic navigators, people whose job it will be to provide oversight and promote prevention and diversion to keep those with mental illness from re-entering the criminal justice system.
That forensic navigator will become that person's ally and advocate to help them through the process based upon what the courts deem as most appropriate next steps.
It's a really good start to try to address some of the gaps in our mental health system, but also the public safety concerns that you have really covered a lot in your stories.
At the Capitol, the hard part is not proposing a new law, it's getting it passed with funding. The cost estimate came in at more than $16 million a year.
This is a really important piece of legislation.
Beneath the dome in the House gallery.
I kind of think we're here for everybody that this hasn't happened to yet.
Joseph St. James watches with family and friends.
This is not a simple bill.
Lawmakers debate before a vote to seal gaps in state law. Gaps that cost Joseph's husband, Paul Pfeiffer's, life.
Members, I would like to acknowledge Paul Pfeiffer's family sitting in the gallery today.
Paul was killed by a neighbor, previously found too mentally ill to stand trial for assault and carjacking, so just released, sent home without proper care and oversight.
The system we have right now is not working.
When it comes time to vote,
there's more greens than red.
It passes 102 to 31. Out in the hallway.
Thank you so much.
A Democrat.
Oh my gosh. Oh man.
A Republican.
Thank you so much.
And a man whose story.
Oh, really? It's hard to put into words.
Is making a difference.
Secretary will close the roll.
However, across the hall in the Senate, there's still work to do.
We really need to get after this.
Republican Jim Abler and Democrat Carla Bigham help lead the charge as it comes down to the final night of the legislative session.
I also want to thank, actually, who I think had more of an impact than they know is Carol Levin for continuously telling the story about the need to close this gap and keeping the pulse on the legislature to make sure we did what we needed to do.
House File 27.
The Senate votes unanimously in support of the bill.
The Senate is in recess.
But has a few tweaks.
Messages from the Senate.
So it has to go back to the House with no time to spare.
It's coming to the floor at 11:54 at night on the last night of session.
Close call is one way to put it. Yeah. 3 minutes left.
Six. But who's counting?
Yeah, it was a close one.
As the clock ticked towards midnight, as the very last action before session ended for the year,
The clerk will take the roll on the bill.
the gap reforms
The clerk will close the roll.
passed into law.
The bill is repassed as a
Change was done so that we can close this gap.
Maybe the tragic stories we've heard about will never happen again.
This is one of the most significant bills of this session.
Really? One of the most significant?
Absolutely.
What was accomplished last night is life-changing for so many families.
Families feeling the frustration and helplessness that Malcolm Leslie's did as they watched him decompensate without the treatment he was supposed to get. Changes to help prevent other families from feeling the same loss as those who loved Lindsay Overbay, Tommy McCoy, Abigail Simpson, and Paul Pfeiffer.
This is going to save lives. Not a life, but lives.
A historic reform law that also closes that other gap our investigation discovered, the one that allowed the Buffalo Clinic shooter to legally buy a gun despite a history of mental illness and criminal charges. Thanks for watching The Gap.